Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you everybody for being here today. Today we're going to be talking about the principles of body composition. I just, give me one second. I kind of forgot how to share screen. So let me do that real quick. Here we go. Awesome. Present. Cool. Cool. So yeah, today we're going to be talking about the principles of body composition. Before we get into that, just a short intro on me. My name is Tyler Jacob Yadial. I am a coach at Central Athlete. I'm OPEC CCP and Precision Nutrition Level 1 certified. I'm originally from a small town called Elsa, Texas in the Rio Grande Valley. Moved to Austin in November of 2018, almost 2 years ago. It's getting kind of cool, getting close to that anniversary. And I'm currently obtaining an online degree in communications from Lamar University. So the whole COVID scenario didn't really change much for school for me. So it's been interesting adjusting. Real quick, we're just going to go over today's agenda. Pretty simple, except we're going to get a little bit more specific as we go, but we're going to go over the principles of energy balance, the principles of gaining mass, and the principles of losing mass, and then we'll open the floor for some questions. First, however, very important disclaimer on all the information that I'll be speaking about today. It all needs to be taken generally with a larger grain of salt. For someone to put on mass efficiently or lose mass effectively, a lot of things need to be equal. So is someone getting an optimal amount of sleep? Are they drinking an optimal amount of water? Do they have good food hygiene? Do they have good sleep hygiene? What are their stress levels like? A lot of things really generally need to be in balance for these things need to happen, which is where our assessment process at Central Athlete comes into play. So we wouldn't apply any of these principles without having an incredibly deep understanding of an individual before starting to implement some of these practices. So it's really important to understand also that the principles and practices that we're going to be going over today are not meant to be sustainable. Today's presentation isn't about how to eat sustainably forever. It is effectively teaching people how to change their body composition to put on or lose mass. And principles surrounding that are just not designed to be sustainable for the rest of your life. So important things to note on that. Other factors that will affect your metabolism and your ability to gain mass or lose mass, just to name a few, are your age, your gender/sex, weight, genetics, how tall you are, how well your metabolism is functioning currently, what your current toxicity levels look like, what type of food allergies you have, how your adrenals are functioning, how stressed you are, it plays into that. Additionally, into your hormone function, your thyroid function, whether or not you have GI dysbiosis. There's several factors and several different variables at play here that can either help people gain mass or lose mass, or for the majority, make it very difficult for people to do just that, which is again, very important for us to have a very deep understanding of an individual before we approach or try using any of these principles. So very important disclaimers right out the bat. Don't try to implement these things unless you have a very clear understanding of who you're working with, who you are, what your limitations may be, or what your client's limitations may be. So with all that being said, principles of energy balance. All starts with the simple formula of calories in minus calories out equals energy balance. So what does that mean? That means whenever we eat X amount of food during a day, and then we burn X amount of calories during that day, what is left over, positive or negative levels of calories, is your energy balance. Where do we get this energy from our calories? Three primary macronutrients. So we'll get energy from protein, carbohydrate, and fat. Protein and carbohydrate are equally as energy dense. They both have 4 calories per gram, and fat is a little bit more energy dense with 9 calories per gram. Another factor that plays a huge part into understanding an individual's energy balance is their basal metabolic rate. So there are 2 ways to kind of look at what basal metabolic rate is. If I were to wake up tomorrow and not move or get out of my bed all day, there is a certain amount of calories that I would burn and emit energy from, and there's a certain amount of calories that I would essentially need to support basic organ function. This is kind of our basal metabolic rate. There are a few ways that we can get this. At Central Athlete, we have an in-body body composition analyzer that we'll put our clients on, that we will get on ourselves to analyze our body composition, and that will give us our basal metabolic rate. Additionally, as we move forward within the presentation, there are a little less accurate ways to assume and figure out basal metabolic rate, but they're just some general formulas that have been tried and true in the strength and conditioning field. So we'll get into those a little bit later. Another thing to be cognizant and aware of is how our energy expenditure affects our energy balance. This is that calories out portion. So exercise, I have a little graphic on the side that kind of illustrates this, but exercise, working out at the gym, maybe going climbing at ABP or Crux, going on a semi-aggressive swim somewhere, that exercise will contribute to a portion of your energy expenditure every day. Another vastly overlooked portion of someone's energy expenditure is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or what we like to call NEAT. So think about the 1 or 2 daily walks you'll take your dog on, or you'll take your kids on, cycling to and from work or the gym. This is what contributes into NEAT. It's very low level movement that will just elevate your heart rate slightly and help you burn a little bit more calories. The last piece that we're going to be going over when it comes to energy expenditure is the thermic effect of food. This is the amount of energy it takes to digest certain foods. When we're looking back into our macronutrients, for the most part, proteins take the most energy to break down. Fats take the second place in that, and carbohydrates, which break down mainly into a lot more simple sugars, take a lot less energy to break down. So these are all the general principles of energy balance that we want to understand before we determine how we can manipulate these variables and principles into helping people gain mass or helping people lose mass. So to start, we're going to be talking about the principles of gaining mass. So looking at the energy balance equation, whenever we're trying to put mass on, we want our calories in to be more than our calories out. We want to be eating more food than energy that we're burning. So when we're trying to come up with a base level prescription for someone, we first want to determine their maintenance calories, or however many calories they will burn on a regular daily basis. So this goes back to that disclaimer, all things kind of need to be equal. For the most part, people want to have a pretty solid routine. For example, I'll wake up at 6 a.m., go on an hour-long walk. The rest of my day is very routine after that. I'll chill out for a bit, have some breakfast, go train. And again, days look pretty similar. So energy expenditure looks very similar. So determining maintenance calories, how we do that, if we don't have an in-body, we'll take an individual's body weight in pounds, we'll multiply that number by 10, and then we will then multiply that number by a certain activity multiplier. If we have access to an in-body or another method that can give us an accurate representation of someone's basal metabolic rate, we'll just sub out body weight in pounds times 10, and we'll multiply their basal metabolic rate by that activity multiplier. How do we then determine the caloric prescription overall to help someone gain mass? Well, it goes back to our original equation. We want more calories coming in than going out. So there are some ranges that we can play with. Ideally, we want to have 100 to 300 calories over that maintenance level every day. This is going to depend on the individual's temperament, their ability to eat food. Some people have a hard time eating large volumes of food because they're not used to it. So playing with these numbers is important. And then determining the macronutrient prescription, we start with protein all the time whenever it comes to determining someone's mass gain or mass loss prescription. Protein is maybe, I'd also say, the most important macronutrient around recovery when it comes to resistance training, strength and conditioning, all those pieces. It's a very bro term, but it is incredibly important whenever it comes to synthesizing, repairing damaged tissues, etc., putting on mass, It additionally, whenever it comes to, and we'll get into it a little bit later, but when people want to lose mass, protein typically tends to be the most satiating of all the macronutrients. So we always start with protein. Whenever it comes to gaining mass, we want people eating about 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. After that, we will analyze the whole caloric prescription. 20 to 30% of the whole caloric prescription will come from fat. And then after you get your protein out of the way, you have that number of macros set. After you have the number of grams of fat per day set, the rest of those calories will come from carbs. So we're going to look at a couple of approaches here. Approach number one and approach number two apply to people with different temperaments. Approach number one is for someone who maybe tracking food on MyFitnessPal just does not jive with them. It is not something that's incredibly easy for them to get into, and it's hard for them to stay consistent with. There are a lot of different ways that we can go about changing our body composition that don't necessarily require that. While it absolutely can be very helpful for certain types of people, this first approach takes a little bit more subjective measures into play and takes a little bit of mental bandwidth away from an individual as well. So we're going to start with protein here again. Percy, he weighs 150 pounds. He wants to go from 150 to 165, for example. So we're going to start by prescribing him 150 grams of protein a day. So because in this example, Percy isn't a huge fan of getting super analytical with the numbers and having to hit his exact macros and calories every day, what we're going to make sure we do keep him accountable to is eating 6 palm-sized servings of protein a day. What exactly does that mean? So if we look at 150 pounds, 150 grams of protein, we can break that down into how many servings he'll have. A palm-sized serving of protein for an individual, male or female, is typically around 20 to 30 grams. It's a bit of a large range, which is why we want to put them on the higher end of that range, so at 6 palm-sized servings, right? Because a palm of chicken breast isn't going to have the same macronutrient makeup as a palm of steak. You're going to have different levels of fat and protein content, along with just different sorts of nutrients happening in between both. How else we can think about this 20 to 30 grams is 4 ounces of lean meat, maybe 2 eggs. Ideally though, the main thing that we're keeping Percy accountable to here is eating those 6 palm-sized servings of protein. Again, protein is incredibly important for building mass and repairing muscle tissue, which is what Percy wants to be doing. Another subjective measure, and the rest of these measures are all entirely subjective and will require Percy to be a little bit more intentional when he is eating. So what this means is we want him to be eating past satiation. We're not giving him a carbohydrate or fat prescription, and we're not breaking down like a meal plan for him. So every time he does eat, in order to ensure that he's kind of overloading his caloric intake, we want to be pushing his satiation level, or not, let me rephrase that. He should be eating past his satiation level. How can we kind of hack our body's response to letting us know that we're full? By eating quickly. So there's a delayed response between our stomach and our brain, and leptin and ghrelin and satiety and hunger hormones. And the faster that we can eat, the more time that I guess we will give our stomach to catch up and tell our brain, oh, you're full. So the faster you eat, the longer it's going to take for you to know, oh, okay, I've eaten past capacity. So the faster you eat, the more calories you can get in, the quicker you can get to achieving that mass gain goal. Additionally, and this is again where this disclaimer comes into play, you want to be eating foods that digest fast. You don't want a lot of things to be sitting in your stomach all the time, because it's going to make it harder for you to eat another meal later on. So you want to eat foods that digest quickly for you, right? So for example, I could drink a glass of milk, and within 10 minutes, I'll feel hungry again, right? My body can digest dairy and lactose fairly well. Some people who are lactose intolerant, not only will they not be able to digest that, they won't be able to absorb any of the calories or nutrients associated with that glass of milk as well. So this is where that disclaimer comes into play of understanding the individual, what foods digest well for them, what foods digest quickly for them. And if there are any sorts of questions around like more individualized, excuse me. Ooh, something stuck in the throat. Whenever it comes to specific questions around that, my contact information will be at the end of this presentation, so you can feel free to reach out to me along with any questions you might have later. Moving into our second approach, this is for Percy if he is all about the numbers, all about knowing his macros and calories, and wants to hit everything right to a T. So how we'll do this, Percy's 150 pounds again. Now we have his level of activity at play in here as well. So he's active. What does that mean? He gets about 8,000 to 10,000 steps in a day. Dude moves a lot all the time, and he burns a lot of calories regularly. Additionally, he trains under some sort of resistance 3 days a week. So given our formula from earlier, we have his body weight times 10 times his activity multiplier of 1.9. That gives us a maintenance level about 2,850 calories. Excuse me. So determining his mass gain caloric prescription, we have 2,850 calories plus 200 calories. Percy is an individual in this situation who's done a couple of mass gain trials before, but adding in 500, 300 calories a day would be pretty strenuous and difficult for him. So we're going to start with 200 calories for him, putting him at a daily minimum intake of 3,050 calories to help ensure he gets that added mass that he wants. His basal level of protein intake will be 150 grams, a gram per pound of body weight, 95 grams of fat, and then the rest of his calories will be coming from 400 grams of carbs. So this is a little bit less subjective. This is for people who want that exact number to hit every day and who operate well off of that. So again, this goes back to that disclaimer, understanding who you're working with and understanding yourself. I've been on the end of both of these sorts of approaches when it comes to nutrition, whether it be making sure I hit my daily goals of protein, fat, carbs, and calories on my FitnessPal every day, into now just tracking how many servings of protein I eat and eating when I'm hungry, eating to 80 to 90% full, pieces like that. So just getting a really good understanding of who you're working with and how to approach their mass gain goals. Next, we are going to get into the principles of losing mass. So we're going to reverse the equation here. We want our calories in to be less than our calories out. So we want to be eating less energy than we are burning more energy than we're consuming. Multiple ways to state that, but very simple to understand. Again, we determine maintenance calories like we described earlier. Determining a caloric prescription here, instead of adding calories, we'll subtract from that maintenance level. So 250 to 500 calories under maintenance daily are some pretty good ranges. 500 calories would be for an individual who has a pretty good understanding that feelings of hunger and that feeling of a deficit is pushing you in the right direction. This is ideal, would be for someone who's done some sort of nutritional cut before and can handle a lower amount of calories in their diet. For someone who might not have done any sort of intensive nutritional coaching before, going on that lower end of the caloric deficit spectrum might be easier for them to adhere and stay compliant. The numbers are a little bit different when it comes to determining the macronutrient prescription. All of the information additionally that I have here presented to you is from the Muscle and Strength Pyramid. We have that in our continuing education files and documents, Essential Athlete. So it's a book that I recently read. For protein, we want to be having about 1.1 to 1.3 grams per pound of body weight a day. The reason why we're going a little bit more here is because whenever we're trying to lose mass, part of the mass that can be lost is muscle. So by supplementing a little bit more protein in here, we can help nullify that effect of possibly losing muscle mass. It's not a foolproof method by any means, but it can help. Again, fat is about 20 to 30% of daily calories, and same as adding mass, the remaining calories to fulfill your maintenance needs will come from carbohydrates. So for our second approach in terms of losing mass, we're going to talk about Ash. As Ash is 185 pounds. So going back to Percy's first approach about, in this situation, Ash doesn't super jive with my fitness pal or chronometer and just tracking super intently with his food. We're going to be taking things we're going to be changing the perspective of how we are tracking things, right? So his daily protein prescription is 200 grams a day. That comes out to about 8 palm-sized servings. Went over that before. We're flipping the subjective measure of fullness here. So we want to be eating to about 80% full when we're trying to lose mass. So if this is full, like in our gas tank, we want to be hovering right around here. Never really full, always feeling maybe like we could eat a little bit more or we're a little hungry. Those feelings should be associated with, okay, I'm moving in the right direction. And this kind of goes back to my point of that range of calorie deficits of 250 to 500 under maintenance. It really just depends on the individual you are that you're working with and what your perceptions are around those hunger pangs. Additionally, how we can help our body let us know sooner that we're approaching that 80% is by eating slowly and thoroughly chewing your food. So by taking a bite of that chicken breast, putting your utensils down, relaxing, chewing 30 to 40 times, then taking another bite, or whether that be broccoli or some potatoes, whatever it may be, by eating more slowly, we're going to allow that delayed response from our stomach to catch up faster and let us know we're approaching that 80% mark. Additionally, what we want to promote is faster levels of satiety for people. So how we can also do that is by having people eat nutrient-dense foods that digest slowly, disclaimer for them. Generally, if you have a crown of broccoli and a chocolate chip cookie, the simple sugars within that chocolate chip cookie are going to get burnt in your system much faster than that entire crown of broccoli. Not only is it way easier for you to consume just a whole chocolate chip cookie, just want everyone to imagine eating a whole crown of broccoli and how much chewing you need to do just to get that whole thing down into your stomach. It's naturally going to slow you down. And because of the chemical makeup between those two types of foods, the certain types of sugars and carbohydrates within a crown of broccoli are going to take a lot more time to break down within your GI than, say, a chocolate chip cookie. Again, disclaimer, depends on the individual. A last piece here as well, whenever we're trying to put on mass, eating is kind of your job. Your job is to kind of always be feeling a little bit like you don't want to eat again, but you know you still have to keep getting those calories in. We're trying to lose mass. It's a little bit of the opposite. We want to be feeling like, okay, we're in a deficit. We are under fueling ourselves right now. So we only want to be eating when we're hungry. And again, hungry can mean very different things to a multitude of people. Ideally, what we mean here is like your stomach is growling and it's letting you know, okay, we're completely empty. We need a little bit of something to function and to make sure you're energized and can move through your training or your workout or your work day. So whether you're a coach or someone who's trying these principles for yourself, you want to have a really good understanding of what each of these subjective measures mean. So if I was taking a client into a mass loss phase with these sorts of approaches, I would be very, very clear in my communication and letting them know what 80% full looks like, what hungry actually means, what thoroughly chewing your food actually means, what eating nutrient-dense foods actually means. Being very clear in your communication when you're working with subjective measures is incredibly important to ensure someone can succeed with measures like these. But let's say Ash just wants to fit his macros and fit his calories. This is the breakdown of how we'll do it. Ash is pretty sedentary. The majority of his walking is to and from the car, around the gym, to go up to the restroom at work, etc. So he's pretty sedentary, but he does weight lift 4 days a week. So for him, his maintenance level of calories, body weight times 10 times his multiplier of 1.4 comes out to 2,590 calories. Just a reminder, basal metabolic rate times the activity multiplier will likely give you a more accurate representation of what an individual will need, but this is a pretty good estimation. So for Ash, he has done nutritional cuts before. He completely understands that being hungry is pushing him in the right direction, and he knows that that's good for him when he's trying to get shredded and lose weight. So we can go with that larger end range of 500 calories under maintenance per day. So for him, 2,090 calories is incredibly doable for him. I'm giving him 205 grams of protein a day to make sure he holds onto as much muscle mass as he can, 70 grams of fat, and 160 grams of carbs. So again, the math makes things a little bit more simple, but all things need to be equal for individuals like this. Ash needs to be sleeping an optimal amount, drinking an optimal amount of water. Basic lifestyle guidelines need to be met for these things to be happening, and his temperament needs to match this sort of prescription as well. So with all of that being said, I want to open the floor less so to questions around like the numbers and those principles, but more so some nuances maybe around possible roadblocks that people might encounter with principles like these. Say, for example, someone is a vegetarian. It makes it a little bit harder to get animal-based proteins in because vegetarians don't necessarily consume a lot of animal-based proteins. So a little bit more nuanced questions like that are kind of what I'm looking for here. If anybody has any, feel free to unmute yourself.
I have one. This maybe is going in a little bit of a different direction, and so you can kind of sidestep if you want to, but obviously nutrition plays a massive part in body composition changes, but training does kind of help those composition changes move in the right direction. So not just like putting on weight, but putting on like good weight, and not just like losing weight, but like losing the fat and not so much the muscle like you talked about. So what type of training would like Percy and Ash want to be doing to make sure that they were like getting the most out of the nutrition plan and like really getting to their goals?
It's a great question. So for someone who's trying to lose mass, so if I'm understanding that question completely correctly, we want to maximize training to support body composition goals as well, specifically for someone trying to lose mass. So where we'll usually go with individuals is full body resistance. So trying to damage as much muscle tissue as possible in order to promote the greatest caloric burning response and muscle building, muscle strengthening response as well. In that aspect, additionally, a lot of people have the misconception that do a bunch of cardio. And while that does help burn a lot of calories, your lean mass is what makes up your basal metabolic rate. So the more lean mass you can put on, the stronger you can get. It's going to make it even easier for you to burn more calories and lose more weight, which is why we always try to push more resistance training over strictly aerobic and cardio-based training for people whenever they're trying to lose weight, because they're going to get a lot more bang for their buck from that than they will just doing cardio aerobic activities. Anyone else got any questions? Well, cool. So if there aren't any more questions for today, here's my contact information. My email, my website, and my Instagram handle are all listed here. If there are any more questions that are a little bit more nuanced, kind of like Shayna asked, anyone needs any more specific feedback or anything, feel free to reach out to me. Outside of that, those are the principles of changing your body composition. I appreciate everyone's time and attention today, and be on the lookout for more Central Athlete Chats in the future.
Thanks,